for any population on a campus.
Absolutely. Well, and it's what's really interesting is what we've been finding when we go to a lot of the universities, when we talk with the athletic department about what we're doing, invariably a lot of schools, they're like, okay, we need the main administration to sign off on it or whatever it may be. And then you start talking to them and they see what you're doing. And the first question is there any reason we can't open this up to all students? Right.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
which is why, as much as possible, we try to keep a lot of our content evergreen so that understanding a credit score, understanding the difference between buying and leasing a car, renting or leasing an apartment, um, all the stuff can pertain to anybody. There's
Hmm.
certain topics that are always going to be very athlete specific regarding contracts and NIL and everything else. But what we've found is for all education, if you can't be authentic, representational, um, and engaging, you're just gonna fall on deaf ears, and it's
This episode of EdUp Accelerated Excellence is supported in part by Elation Communications. Elation Communications is dedicated to amplifying diverse voices and driving meaningful change. At Elation Communications, we specialize in crafting authentic and inclusive communication strategies that resonate with diverse audiences. Are you a small business, nonprofit, disability, or education organization that values diversity, creativity, and excellence in communication? Then let Elation Communications help elevate your brand and amplify your voice. To learn more, contact us at elationcommunications.com. That's elationcommunications.com. Welcome, welcome, welcome to EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a podcast for the advancement of educational effectiveness and equity across both traditional and non traditional learning experiences and contexts. I am your host, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. In this episode, we sit down with Steve Simmons, co founder of Nilent, NIL Enterprise Solutions, to learn how the organization is supporting college athletes for financial literacy, well being, and social media branding. Let's get into it. We're back at Up Accelerated Excellence with another stimulating conversation with an outstanding guest. Our guest today will talk a bit about the concept of capitalism and altruism and supporting college athletes in branding, financial literacy, and mental health well-being. Today we have with us Stephen Simons. So, Stephen or Steve?
Steve's fine,
All
please.
right.
I've been called a lot of things.
As we all have, I'm sure. So, Steve, before Nilent, this is your organization where you work, and you're the COO and co-founder. What were you doing prior, and how did that professional experience inform the development of Nilent with your co-founder, Peter Hassan?
Sure. I spent the better part of 25, almost 30 years in the financial industry through hedge funds and private equity vehicles and, early stage startups. That was always my focus. My partner spent the better part of 20 years with the Chicago Blackhawks organization.
Hmm.
And the two of us were both consulting with the Dick Butkus Foundation around the Linebacker of the Year award for the NFL and the college football. And right around that time was when the NIL ruling from the Supreme Court, which stands for names, image, and likeness, where people always, they hear that and they hear the Supreme Court came down and allowed it. All it did was pave the pathway for it. It wasn't an actual the Supreme Court saying, okay, now these kids can do this. But in the most basic terms, it meant that now college athletes would be able to be compensated literally for their name, their image, or likeness. So when
Hmm.
you think of video games, there's the Madden college football game, where for years they would have literally active college football players playing on the screen, but these kids wouldn't see any kind of remuneration for it.
Mm-hmm.
So now it means whether it's through brand integrations, sponsorships, you name it, these kids are able to get paid, which we think is great. But when Pete and I sat down and looked at it and said, Pete worked with professional athletes through the NHL Players Association. I worked with athletes through, the finance side of things. And the
Mm-hmm.
one commonality we saw is the number of guys who went bankrupt, sideways, homeless, prison, you name it. And, we thought there had to be a better way. And it really came down to providing education of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of put our heads together, and then we started reaching out to a bunch of professional athletes we're friendly with and said, what would have helped you? How would this propel, your career or your financial well-being? Then talk to a bunch of college athletes saying, what do y'all need to hear in this space right now? What would help you? And then finally talk to athletic departments saying, what's keeping you guys up at night? How can we be a resource? And putting that all together, that became the genesis for Nilent, which is short for NIL Enterprise Solutions.
I really like that. That is sort of stakeholder engagement to start up and meeting a need. So you're really talking about the federal ruling that prohibits the NCAA from blocking student athletes from negotiating deals with boosters, um, and so on and so forth, correct?
Absolutely. It opens the doors for everything for them. And, to some degree, while it's great, it's also Pandora's box, right?
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
when you look at professional athletes and the average across all sports, right? 30% of athletes file for bankruptcy within 10 years of retiring. That number is 60% for NBA players within 5 years and 80% for NFL players within 3 years. So what's going to happen to an 18, 19, or 20-year-old who doesn't need a parent to sign off on a contract,
Right.
right? So I love the idea these kids could get paid. I'm jealous as the former shortest and fattest D1 athlete at my university. I didn't see anything, but damn, give them the opportunity, but also give them the education to protect them.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So let's get into sort of the business model, except for the function. So you're working with colleges and universities. Tell us the premise, just briefly about Nylund, and the functional design. How does that work? How do student athletes interact with your organization?
Absolutely. So, we joke about this balance between mercenary capitalism and altruism, right?
Mhm.
Where, how can you do both either in higher education or in business, and it comes down to, from an altruistic point of view, we think this level of education around financial literacy, mental health well-being, and social media savvy and personal brand building
Mhm.
is too important for these college athletes not to have this, particularly when you take into account female and BIPOC athletes who are typically underserved in these areas. So we felt that getting this information out was of paramount importance, and which is why we don't charge universities for our platform. Now, this means we can go into every university, give them our platform, and I can touch on exactly how that works momentarily.
Mhm.
And that was step one. Now, from the capitalistic standpoint, some point you have to be able to cover the cost of building a business, satisfy investors, and be able to continue in an ongoing manner.
Right.
And that's where we partner with corporate sponsors who want to be able to engage this very important 18 to 24-year-old demographic. But rather than just simply throwing money at the kids, you're getting behind a platform that teaches them real life meaningful skills, financial literacy, mental health well-being, all these things that will help them while they're in college, and then again for the 40 years after they graduate. So it's not just about, hey, let's find a kid and he's a great football player, let's throw him some money and let him represent the brand. It's more of, how can we pave the way for the future by supporting these kids now and conceivably develop lifetime relationships with them, which will pay off in dividends for the corporate partners down the line.
Mhm.
So our platform itself is, if you think of a hybrid between a master class and a TED Talks, it
Right.
consists of short form video content, about 5 to 7 minutes long, because that's all these kids can handle, and all taught by a representational array of professional athletes, entrepreneurs, and industry experts on just, we're constantly adding topics. So it could be as basic as, what is a credit report? Why does a credit score matter? How do you set up a budget? How do you create a trust? to things like how do you recognize a potential eating disorder? How do you recognize a potential opioid addiction? All these things that are relevant to athletes, and everything being taught by athletes who've either gone through it and experienced it or who are able to provide cautionary tales. It just helps make it a lot more relevant. The running joke simply is the world doesn't need a middle-aged white guy out there saying, hey, this is what's going to work for all 600,000 college athletes,
Hmm.
right? It has to be something that can be relatable to these kids. So I could tell them, hey, well, here's what a balanced portfolio looks like, but it's not going to hold the same weight as a former football player who comes from the same small town in Mississippi, who
Right.
has that understanding and background. That's what really works. And it's all about making that connection with these kids.
So relevancy and absolutely. So you're putting in front of them someone who they probably look up to and respect and would listen to,
Absolutely.
without much nudging and cajoling.
Right. It's about the credibility and the authenticity of it, right?
Right. Right.
And whenever possible, folks who can provide cautionary tales or can say, hey, look, here's a mistake I made. Don't make this mistake, right? And it just resonates a lot more so than just saying, hey, don't do this.
So for the listening audience, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. I noticed you use that acronym. Do students receive any sort of academic credit from completion of the modules?
They don't necessarily receive academic credit, but what they do receive, we've worked with several state legislatures, and for most states that allow athletes to participate in NIL, they
Mhm.
have to undergo a mandatory minimum amount of education typically around financial literacy. So, for example, I believe the state of New York is 5 hours of minimum education in order to participate in the sport. Now, what ends up happening is, I'll always defer to my alma mater, and it makes my partner insane, and I owe him $5 every time I mention Colgate, but that's neither here nor there.
They love it.
But
Colgate loves
if
it.
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. So if Colgate says, hey, we've got all these athletes, we have to do this mandatory minimum 5 hours, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, well, we've got an alum who does taxes or is an accountant or works for Deloitte or whatever it may be, they'll
Mm.
come in and talk to these athletes, and which is great. It's great having that engagement, but most athletes don't have the luxury or wherewithal to spend 4 or 5 hours in an auditorium on an off day in between everything else they have to do. And unfortunately, the content gets lost. So, what we found is by doing these little bite sized pieces of information that are gamified, that reward them for completing the modules,
Mhm.
it holds the attention, and it sort of inspires them to kind of do more and more modules if they know I can get more and more rewards by doing this. And invariably, they always have it at their fingers so they can say, oh, I want to follow up with this guy. I want to learn more about this. Or she was really interesting. She could help me build my brand. So we try to make it relevant and as hands on and accessible to keep the engagement factor.
So you mentioned NIL. Can you explain that very quickly?
So NIL, which, it's one of those things where no one heard of it, no one heard of it. Then all of a sudden it's in the news all the time, especially if you've been watching March Madness. Um, it stands for names, image, and likeness. So the N, the I, the L. And it simply means that if you were an athlete at, XYZ university and you want to go out and say, hey, I think Reebok needs to give me a sneaker deal, but
Hmm.
I'm going to go out and post content all the time on my social media channels, and I'm going to be in my kicks and doing all these things. You are able to get some sort of compensation from that if the brand wants to.
Right. From using
Previously,
the
you couldn't, and it goes in so many, like, without getting into all the specifics of it.
Mhm.
You have some athletes like Livy Dunn from LSU. She's a gymnast who's made seven figures through NIL by being a brand representation like guru, if you will, and she's
Right.
constantly posting content, and it's great and it resonates. The traditional traditional influencers, which honestly, I'm of a certain age, I don't really know who they are or what they are. But that being said,
Oh, we
you know,
know them back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
Nike,
exactly. You
Nike, and
know,
some other.
all of them, right? And when you look at college athletes, they have a greater than 12% better engagement rate than traditional influencers and a better ROI for brands who want to sponsor them. So it's really a mission to really train these kids and recognize you don't have to be a Heisman Trophy candidate to engage in NIL. You could be a third string field hockey goalie in the middle of Minnesota, but if you're good on social media and you're authentic, you're going to get paid.
So I'm going to ask you, what is the benefit for the corporate partners who engage in um, uh, supporting and nudging the athletes who complete the modules?
So it's multiple levels, right? So from the most basic level, brands are always looking for ways to engage the 18 to 24-year-old demographic. It's
Right.
a key demographic, especially if you're a bank, you're a data or service provider, you're an insurance company, right? I'm in the same bank for the better part of 40 years. I've done multiple mortgages, alimonies, you name it, through that
Hmm.
same bank because they were literally the first bank that was in my first job's office,
Right.
right? So, what is the cost of acquisition for clients if you're a bank going, you can get 40-year relationships with these kids and capture them now, especially if some of them going on to become professional athletes and really making some serious capital. So, A, it's about that reach and accessibility. Second, it's about the feel good nature that comes with a social media campaign behind backing financial literacy and mental health well-being, right?
Hmm.
And, because a lot of brands, in full disclosure, a lot of brands get very hesitant about the idea of backing a single 18, 19, or 20-year-old athlete, and
Right.
it's nobody wants the headline risk. As horrible as it is, you don't want to be a chief marketing officer and wake up on a Monday morning with news that your client, Henry Ruggs, had a bad weekend. That's just not
Right.
not a good thing. And if you're able to get behind sort of all college athletes through a mission of financial literacy and you're an investment house, right? And you say, hey, we just want these kids to know we got you, we believe in you, and we want to help you on your mission. Listen, that's a real good feel good campaign that gets out there, which is really great. And then even more than that, because of the way the platform works, where these kids watch a video and at the end is a short quiz, and the end of the quiz a rewards page pops up, they get a reward for completing that page. So it may be something like a $20 gift card to Dick's Sporting Goods. Now, in order to accept it, the kids put out a social media post thanking Dick's Sporting Goods. So you create this grassroots influencer campaign around them.
Right.
And as well, I can attest to personally, if my athlete son got a $20 gift card to Dick's Sporting Goods, I'm still going to drop another $80 when all is said and done.
Oh yeah,
So
definitely.
they know that they're capturing these kids in a very unique manner, and they're going to drive their ROI on it. It's not simply about, well, hey, we want to sponsor this person. Is where we see things that don't necessarily work is when you have the college quarterback talking about his favorite mortgage broker, and it's like, dude, you live
Mhm.
in a dorm, okay? You don't have a mortgage. Come on, stop that nonsense.
Right.
So maybe you'll attract a couple of people who go, well, I like him, so I guess I'll use that mortgage broker because there's a 45% affinity rate for fans who enjoy brands that their athletes that they enjoy watching sponsor. Okay, that's fine. But if you want a real tangible return on that investment, get something into the hands of these kids and force them to do something with it. That makes a huge difference from there, and then build that loyalty from there.
So there is sort of there's a marketing strategy for the partners as well.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I want to drill down a bit more about financial literacy. I know you offer other aspects
Sure.
of educational services, but let's talk about your financial literacy story and what has been the role of financial literacy in your life and its origins of that.
So, I'm of a certain age that, we didn't have computers when I went to college,
Hmm.
didn't understand the whole collegiate process, didn't understand the whole job process. And I was lucky I got my first job coming out of school through an alum
Right.
and put me right into the finance world. And I was able to kind of build a career from there, which was great. But I made plenty of mistakes along the way. I had no idea what a credit score was. I
Hmm.
opened up any credit card that anybody offered me. Um, when you move to New York City and you gotta, you get your first apartment, you're like, well, I need dishes, I need this, I need that. You're like,
Yes, you
and
do.
every department store would like, hey, open up a card, get 20% off your order. And I'm like, this is amazing. And I'm confident that I ended up owing more in credit card debt than I did in student loan debt by the time I got out there. And then fast forward things like understanding when to contribute to a 401k and the benefits of that and the benefits of compound investing over the long term.
Right.
The benefits of having an actual balanced portfolio and not just chasing, the flashiest meme stock or cryptocurrency or whatever. Like without knowing these things, and then later in my career, understand the importance of choosing the right partners and why you need attorneys to sign off on things and everything like that nearly cost me everything. And because of you know shortcuts and poor decisions on things that I should have known better. So much of that for me is the genesis of what we're trying to do by looking at every angle, no matter how small and minute it may seem.
Hmm.
But there's going to be things that if we look at it and say, man, if just one kid comes out of this going, oh, hell, I didn't even think of that, or that's good to know, then we're
Right.
doing something good. Right. And we use the example. There's a kid who played at the University of Florida named Jervon Dexter, who now plays for the Bears. He in his senior year in college, he got his first NIL deal and got paid 400 grand, which is amazing when you're in college.
Right.
It's God bless it. Because the team that offered him the deal, pitched themselves as being, we're all family and we're all going to look out for each other. He decided not to have an attorney sign off on the contract.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. And every time I tell that story and get to that point, everyone has the same reaction. They just kind of roll their eyes and go, "Oh, Lord have mercy." And sure enough, he gets his first check from the Bears and he looks at it and goes, "Hey, where's all my money?" And they go, "Oh, your team has it." He goes, "No, no, no. I am my team." And they go, "Well, y'all might want to talk to somebody because that's not the case." He signed away 35% of his future earnings in perpetuity, right?
Wow.
Now, granted, completely vulture, horrible, horrible deal. Don't know what the business model was with the company that signed him, thinking, okay, one and done and we're good. But,
Hmm.
they're never going to get another client. But had he, taken the time, had the wherewithal and say, if I spend 2 to 3 grand on an attorney to read this contract, it won't cost me the six figures it's going to cost me now to fight this and all the heartache and all the nonsense. So little things like that where we're constantly going, man, what are we missing here? What can we tell these kids? What would help? Right? That it makes all the difference in the world.
So speaking of that, can you share a success story from Nilent's approach to teach college athletes in branding, financial literacy, and mental health well-being? And what did you learn from those, or what have you learned from that success or those successes?
Sure. We've had instances where, you know, we love, first of all, working with kids from outside your Power 5 schools, right?
Mhm.
The Alabamas and Texas of the world, God bless them. Let everyone chase those guys. We want to work with the kids at the HBCUs. We want to work at the kids in the Patriot League. We want to work with the kids in the Coastal Athletic Conference. The schools that aren't getting the attention because a lot of these kids and the athletic departments are like, hey man, why us? We don't have kids who are going to go pro. It doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to us. But then when you look at them, and go, look, you have an engaged and intelligent and aggressive athletic body, right? It's not just about attracting the attention of a corporate sponsor. It's about attracting the attention of corporate recruiters, right?
Mm.
Let's teach these kids some things that's going to help them. And whether it helps them get a job, whether it helps them get an NIL deal,
Hmm.
we're doing something good here. And so we've had cases where, you know, a kid would reach out to us after going through some of the program and saying, "Hey, I was offered this deal. What do you think about this kind of thing?"
Right.
And the first thing we always say is, "Look, we're not attorneys. We're not going to sign off on anything. You should talk to an attorney." But there are times when you look at certain things, you go, if you see the phrase in perpetuity,
Hmm.
that should be a red flag. And we had a case where a kid's like, he's a really good tennis player and a clothing company came to him like, we want to sponsor you, we'd like you to wear your hoodies to all your matches. And he's like, this is
Right.
great, the hoodies are cool, but there was a clause in there that they would be the only clothing brand he could represent. And he was getting in exchange all the merch he wanted, which was fine. But all of a sudden you go on you start making the pro tour, or you're really advancing your career, and now Reebok's reaching out to you, or Nike's reaching out to you, or Under Armour's reaching out to you. And you're going, "Yeah, I want to," and they're like, "No, no, no, you can't. You signed with us."
Right.
So, the biggest thing we teach a lot of these kids is find those deals, but don't just jump at them. And more than anything else, understand what works for you and represents your brand. Like have that alignment. We worked with a kid uh, who's a quarterback at the University of Kentucky, and he got a deal with the largest horse breeder association in Kentucky.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of those things you kind of look at it, and it's just kind of a funny thing. And the whole, commercial is him walking the tracks with the horse, mucking the stables and everything. But you watch it and go, it's really authentic and it feels right. He had grown up on a farm. He's in Kentucky, the horse capital of the country.
Right.
And then you watch it and go, this just works. And then at the end of it, not too soon after, the dairy council reached out to him, said, we love this approach. So there's certain things that fit. So when we can teach these kids how to be authentic, how to understand how to follow, what represents you and your interests.
Right.
And conversely, on the mental health side, the biggest thing is teaching these kids. There's nothing better than being able to teach these kids, you can step away from social media. You don't have to respond to every single thing out there, man. For the love of God, put the phone down. Get away from the computer.
I think that's
Because
a
it's
general life lesson.
listen, it's so easy to get caught up in that vortex. I do it all the time, and I get it. And there's just a point where you go, listen, you've got a platform. Like you've got people watching you now, and especially the higher you climb in those ranks, the more people are watching. And you know what? Not everyone loves you, and that's the first thing you got to understand. And there's also, besides like people from rival schools or whatever, there's just a whole swath out there on the internet who just thrive on Schadenfreude. They want to see people get taken down. They just want to be negative for whatever reason. You get caught up into that, you start blasting people, you start saying stuff you shouldn't be saying. Brands
Mhm.
are watching you, man, and you're literally cutting your own bank account by doing stuff like that, or wrecking your own mental health well-being by engaging. Just step away, man.
Absolutely. I want to think about the guardrails. You didn't say that, but as you were talking, you talked about these mishaps that have happened. Also we have them in our own personal lives, and now you're talking about very young athletes. What are your guardrails to stave off exploitation, for example? Um, and how does that look for Nilent to make sure that someone isn't necessarily being exploited?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we constantly think about is it's so easy when you have this nascent industry, all the
Mm,
vultures come out of the woodwork, right? And all of a sudden it's like, how do we capture this, $20 billion industry? What do we do? How do we capture the next Caitlin Clark early on? Or how do we capture, and part of it, especially now when you're looking at, they're talking about passing NIL at the high school level. Georgia's already passed it. There's
mhm.
other states in line with it. And I struggle with it because, listen, I think everybody in a true capitalistic society, everyone should have the ability to do what they can to make money off their own personal brand. Okay,
Mm,
that's great. There's a difference between somebody going, "Hey, you're going to be great in a commercial. I'd love to have you representing my brand," versus, boosters and other maybe questionable folks going, "I want to pay you to play for this school." Right? Which
right,
again,
right.
technically you can't do, but there's all these gray areas and everything else, and it's been going on for years one way or the other, and now it's just a little bit more out in the open. But when you start talking about, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, in addition to the 18 to 22-year-olds in college, you're also talking about, literally their brains have not fully formed yet, like, and their abilities to engage and interact in some of these respects, it's not there yet. So as much as possible, we're constantly focused on the idea of being able to take time and understand yourself and do what's right for you. And that's so important with the mental health side, right? If there's a brand chasing you and somehow you don't close that deal or whatever, or they decide to move on with somebody else, it's okay. There's going to be other deals. Anybody who's chasing you and trying to get you and threatening you or pressuring you to sign whatever, man, just take a step back and go, maybe that's not who you want to be working with.
So I know you're not, you guys, you don't operate as an agent, but I like the story when sometimes you say, well, we can't give you legal advice, but we can read over a document and give you collegial or sort of friendly advice. But I'm thinking about, these young folks who come in and they see this as an opportunity now that they can earn money off of their talents. Most times it's a drive to improve the conditions of their families. So
Right.
while education is, yes, important, how do you help the young folks to sort of temper that? I guess
It's an
it's enticement.
enthusiasm.
It's an
Yeah.
enticement that
Yep.
now it can run, it could run away from you because you're trying to help
Absolutely.
your family. So how
So,
do you have any guardrails in that regard?
we work, Nilent, as I said before, stands for NIL Enterprise Solutions. So under the enterprise solution aspect of our business, we partner with a lot of strategic partners, including agents and agencies,
Mm-hmm.
and other groups. So we're constantly educating them and providing them education to provide certain guardrails, right? So, most agents don't also act as financial advisors. Some do,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a little self-serving and double dipping in the grand scheme of things. I like to see church and state kind of kept separately. So we try to make sure, we don't necessarily promote specific financial managers or wealth managers, but we're
Mm-hmm.
able to say, hey, here's folks who can help you. Here's folks who work with other athletes like you, because that's what we want to see. We don't want to see a group who's never worked with another athlete because they're not going to understand the very unique approach of working with an athlete. Because when you think about it, if you watch the Super Bowl, in your mind, you're watching these guys and they're your peers, right? For whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason, I'm convinced that everyone playing is the same age as me.
Right.
I am very wrong considering most of them are half my age. So, you forget that a lot of these guys are in their early to mid 20s and they may be done before they even hit 30. Not everyone's Tom Brady.
Right.
And when you have a whole career theoretically ahead of you, if you have not prepared for it, at some point you can wake up and go, all right, now what am I going to do? So, to that point, excuse me, to that point, you have to look at it and say, how are you preparing for the future? What are you doing? So, you just signed a great big contract coming out of school and you want to get your mom a house, you want to get your friends some cars, everything else. Look, that's awesome. I love the idea of sharing the wealth with everyone who's been with you from day one.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Take a step back and slow the roll a little bit and just look at things. There's things you can do to help better everyone's lives around you who've helped you, but you shouldn't do it at the expense of your own life going forward until you have things in place. I use the example of the quarterback at University of Georgia, was just in social media because he purchased a $300,000 Lamborghini SUV. And on the one hand, I want to go, hey man, God bless this country that you can get out there as a 19 or 20-year-old and buy a $300,000 Lamborghini while you're in college. Now, you take that same money and go, all right, I'm going to buy a Toyota Tacoma. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
going to get to campus at the same amount of time because there's traffic and it doesn't matter. And I'm going to bank the rest of that money. And in 10 years, I'm going to have $410,000 waiting for me, probably around the time I'm retiring. Right? And no one's gonna be looking at you sideways going, man, I can't believe you're driving a Toyota Tacoma. Right? I mean, so you have to just recognize, and it's incredibly hard at that age to recognize your own
Right.
certain level of mortality, in the sense going, listen, you may not even get drafted. This may be your peak earning years right now.
Right.
So, do the right thing when you can.
So I think the idea is providing as much information as possible up front.
Every chance possible, we will just like the last thing you want to do is engage with me at a cocktail party and get me started on this stuff because I will just start jumping down you and going, listen, it doesn't have to be that difficult. Like, and it's an amazing opportunity for any kid. I've got a 16-year-old athlete, he'll be in college in 2 years. And I know he walks out, he sees me walk in the room and he puts his hands over his ears. He's like, I know, Dad, I get it, I know. But the more information you can get these kids now to prepare them, or you can get to their parents,
Right.
right? And say, listen, it's no longer just about getting into the right school or getting into the right sport and everything else. It's everything else that comes with it and going, there's things you can so many good things you could do
Right.
and just to really help your future, help your family, everything.
All right, so I want to think a bit about education because that's actually where my professional domain lies. So, what can the education profession learn from the work of Nilent regarding educational effectiveness and equity? And in this case, I guess you can talk about athletes or any population on a campus.
Absolutely. Well, and it's what's really interesting is what we've been finding when we go to a lot of the universities, when we talk with the athletic department about what we're doing, invariably a lot of schools, they're like, okay, we need the main administration to sign off on it or whatever it may be. And then you start talking to them and they see what you're doing. And the first question is there any reason we can't open this up to all students? Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And which is why, as much as possible, we try to keep a lot of our content evergreen so that understanding a credit score, understanding the difference between buying and leasing a car, renting or leasing an apartment, um, all the stuff can pertain to anybody. There's
Hmm.
certain topics that are always going to be very athlete specific regarding contracts and NIL and everything else. But what we've found is for all education, if you can't be authentic, representational, and engaging, you're just gonna fall on deaf ears, and and I am by no means a social justice warrior. I'm just very realistic, and I have the anecdotal evidence. I know that if I have a kid coming from a town of 500 in Mississippi,
Hmm.
and I can have another athlete who comes from another small town and similar background to him, he's going to listen to what he's saying a lot more. He's going to listen to what I'm saying in terms of how to do things, right? And if
Hmm.
you can do things that keep these kids engaged and you're not being pedantic and talking down to them, but
Hmm.
instead trying to encourage them and also understanding you get small windows of attention spans and that's it.
Hmm.
And like you got to be able to hit that window and then go, okay, boom, come back to it when you're ready. Hit that window again, come back to it when you're ready. If you're just constantly look, finance is boring, right? I've spent a career in it. And listen, trading may be exciting and stock markets may be exciting, but at the end of the day, understanding compound interest, understanding taxes,
Hmm.
people going, they're just going to roll their eyes and nod off. But you got to go, hey, man, this is important because is it
They do
important to
that. They do
you?
that until they make money. Once they're making money, they seem to understand
Exactly.
concepts.
Right.
And
You're not making any money. You're not paying any taxes. It doesn't matter. All of a sudden you're making money and you go, why am I paying taxes?
that.
Well, here's why. And by the way, here's how you can maximize it. Here's what you can do to make life better. Right. It all kind of ties in.
So I like the idea of representation matters in terms of the platform and how you engage with students on campus or student athletes. And we're talking about representation broadly, not just around race and gender, but folks who can have an affinity based on how somebody grew up or their life experiences and their aspirations in the future. So how can other institutions in higher education connect with Nylent?
Well, to, you know, first and foremost, we're always happy to talk to everybody. It's funny because we have an engagement now with the largest community college association in California. And
Hmm.
it's funny because people are like, what athletes like, yeah, not only do these schools have sports teams, they have 18 and 24-year olds who want to learn and want to contribute and also want to buy things from brands who would be sponsoring them. So we will have the conversation with everybody, whether they like it or not. We are always accessible, whether I'm prolific, I'm way too prolific on LinkedIn. I think I'm getting told to like stop posting articles, but it is what it is. But y'all can always reach me on LinkedIn under Steven Simmons and Nilent. You can reach out to me directly through ssimmons@nilent.org. On Twitter, we're at NIL Partners. Um, we're always happy to work with anybody because this mission is important. We're finding, especially now on the prep school level and high schools, because of what's
Hmm.
coming down the line,
Hmm.
we're trying to help everyone stay ahead of things, especially the parents.
Hmm.
Um, so we're always looking at that. And again, it's one of those things where, this is not one of these DEI issues. And again, people focus too much on like the social justice of things, or whether things are one way or another, when you should be looking at it going, how can we help prepare the next generation, all kids? How can we understand that the journey for some kids is going to be different than the journey for other kids? And one size is not going to fit all. So you have to be able to be representational. You have to be able to reach out to these kids and be authentic in that respect, because otherwise then you're going to miss out on an opportunity. And something that, we always talk about, 70% of female C-suite executives played a varsity sport in college.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're supporting them now while they're in high school and college as athletes, you're paving the way for future leaders, for future board leaders, right? Certain communities really have stigmatized the idea of mental health well-being and going to a therapist or anything like that. And look, I grew up from the generation of, look, suck it up, tough it out, whatever it is, right? Whereas
Right.
at times it's like, man, I just need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And you have to get past that, and having somebody who can say, hey man, I've been in your shoes, and yeah, it's okay to talk to somebody. It's okay to do this.
It's a different social mindset today. But listen, I know you said it's not DEI, but essentially when what you're professing is meeting students where they are, connecting with them in ways that are authentic, and providing the resources that they need, which are likely going to vary from their counterparts. That essentially is a matter of equity. It is a matter of diversity, and it is a matter of how you include individuals.
Right. And that's where the true idea of DEI comes into play. It's become too political of a football that
Hmm.
everyone just throws it around. One side throws it around versus the other side, instead of taking a step back and going, there are 600,000 college athletes. I
Hmm.
assure you, those 600,000 kids don't look the same. And if you can't recognize that, and if you can't address it, and if you can't figure out that an approach has to work for all the kids, but one approach is not going to work for everybody,
Hmm.
right? Do
Right.
something, because it's too important not to do it.
So I'm going to combine two ideas really quickly, and close us out. So, how do you see Nilent growing? And do you have any spinoffs planned at this time?
So we are, we're incredibly optimistic about our growth trajectory, because we're finding now that we're being asked to work with minor league sports organizations,
Mm.
farm systems. We're just starting to talk with, believe it or not, the service, the various branches of service, because again, you
Oh,
know, if
yeah,
you
that's
think about it, again, the similarities between a soldier finishing a tour of duty or
mm,
their time serving versus a college athlete after spending 15, 20 years playing a sport and coming out. It's a very similar mindset and transition into the real world. And a lot of these skills, again, you know understanding how to renting or buying a place, having a budget, all these things, it's really relevant to get out there. And
mm,
so we're being very cognizant about our growth and not trying to be too many things to too many people right now,
right.
but we understand what the opportunity is in the first place. And in terms of spin-offs and other things, we do have a couple of some really unique projects that the best thing I can do is give you the old school stay tuned. Yeah, the attorneys would not be too keen, nor would the partners, if I just started going, "Hey, well, we got this coming out," and like,
I
but
think we understand it. We understand it.
there's a couple of really cool things that just naturally fit the progression between college athletes, professional athletes, and
Right.
the real world and all that kind of stuff. And just we're excited about it, but we're also excited about, again, as an enterprise solution, some of our partnerships with companies that will help, you know, whether it's for schools or for the individual athletes, understanding how to protect their social media, how to guard against credible threats to them or their families or the schools. Like,
Mm,
and it's stuff that just doesn't get talked out enough. But there's when you look at the amount of money in college athletics, and you factor in also the idea of gambling in college athletics,
mm-hmm.
things go sideways, people get angry, you know, everything we can do to protect and help reduce any kind of issues, man, we're for that all day long.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for giving us insights into the work of Nilent and how you support college athletes in branding, financial literacy, and mental health well-being. And we look forward to connecting with you in the very near future because I'm sure we're gonna have to circle back and unpack a few more um, um, not issues but ideas as you expand. I really like the idea of you talking about, in some ways you didn't say it directly, but what do parents might need to in order to support their students whose lives can change dramatically
Absolutely.
coming out of college and perhaps getting a big contract. So thank you so
Jacob,
much.
I appreciate the opportunity, man. And I'm always happy to chat, and I love what you guys are doing. I think it's the more these conversations are had and getting out there, you're doing a tremendous service. So I love Ed Up, man. It's great.
All right, thank you so much. This episode of EdUp Accelerated Excellence is supported in part by Elation Communications. Elation Communications is dedicated to amplifying diverse voices and driving meaningful change. At Elation Communications, we specialize in crafting authentic and inclusive communication strategies that resonate with diverse audiences. Are you a small business, nonprofit, disability, or education organization that values diversity, creativity, and excellence in communication? Then let Elation Communications help elevate your brand and amplify your voice. To learn more, contact us at elationcommunications.com. That's elationcommunications.com. Thank you for engaging with the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community. You can find this episode and others on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Music. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to follow us and share within your network.